So today we're going to be talking about, I want us to have a conversation about, we're going to talk about work, labor, and specifically about the division of labor. You know, how more or less our societies in 2019 are organized around the idea that each of us should do one thing really good, and everybody to their own expertise. What Adam Smith, the work of the pinhead maker. To us, journalism or data science or medicine, we work in that. There we find even a subspecialty, and we work in that, and we get that, and then we get hired, and that's our job, to do that one thing. So for that, there's pressure from the university to come up with ways of working that are called interdisciplinary. And data science itself is a product of already some interdisciplinary encounters. So we're going to be talking about new forms of interdisciplinary work that can have new impact and put a little bit further pressure on this idea of the current division of labor that we have in the university, which many of you I know are going to join the university later, and I imagine most of you are going to join different sectors of society. Ideas I hope we can talk about today may be. The other thing we're going to talk about is the actual projects themselves that I'm going to be using as an example. And I'm going to be focusing most of my comments on the last project that actually we did using this model for which had a lot of impact for a librarian, whatever a librarian can hope to have on the world. Yeah. Hey, what? You're gonna try to mute the.
They don't know how to. Can people online mute? It's a button on Zoom. You just press mute.
Okay, so I'm gonna start by talking. I'm gonna start with the example, with the project, and then we'll move to labor. And then hopefully we can have a joint conversation. So the main example I'm going to use is the project Torn Apart Separados, which was done by 7 people summer of 2018. In fact, it was around this time when we were finishing volume 2. We did it in 2 volumes. The first volume, which you see here, is a series of visualizations and essays that sort of map out all of the detention centers that ICE, the immigration police in this country, ICE stands for Immigration Control Enforcement. In orange, big orange dots here in the iconic homepage main visualization, you see the centers, the centers that have active populations of 1 or more. So some of them have only 1, some of them have hundreds of daily populations of incarcerated immigrants in them. In the yellow, small orange dots, you see incarceration centers that ICE has access to potentially. They already have contracts with different county jails and other facilities, government facilities, where they could use those facilities if they wanted to. They don't necessarily have them. For the past 5 years of this study, 2014 to 2018. In blue, you have the private juvenile detention facilities where our teams more or less suspect that the children were held during the family separation crisis that prompted the project in the first place. Let me back up a little bit. So this starts around the time when there's a video circulating on Twitter and Facebook and other media of little kids crying for their parents because they're being separated from their families at the border by a new policy of the Trump administration. Of course, everybody knows the Trump administration is trying to dissuade immigration by just inflicting more horror and more fear on immigrant families than the Obama administration had done. Now, this video of this circulating in social media created an outcry in the American public. So we got together in the lab, which is, I'll talk about towards the end, I'll talk about the lab here at Columbia. And we were wondering if we could use some of the techniques we had used before, doing nimble tense, to mobilize a small team of people to actually intervene in the situation, not only find out what was happening with the kids that were being separated with the families, but also help the American public understand the extent of the ICE operation and help us understand where were we going. What is this? All of this Trump politics and all of these new policies leading to? So that was on Father's Day, 2018, around June. We said yes. Like after an hour of conversation, we said yes. Let's do something. I helped put together a team of 7 people, and we went to town to produce this map and a series of other visualizations I'm going to show you in a second. The process is simple and can be understood very easily by students. The team starts with a research question, and we spend the first 2 or 3 days doing the research. What we're looking for is not individual data points. What we're looking are data for data sets. When we know the limits of the existing data sets that we can find in 2 or 3 days of really intense Googling and calling people on the phone, then we do individual points. After we have both the data sets that we have compiled and individual points that we have begun to compile as well, then the middle stage kicks in, which is the stage at which we analyze, start doing exploratory analysis of the data, and see if there are stories we can tell from this data set, whether these data sets can help us tell a story that we haven't been able to tell before, or that would be useful for the public. It is an iterative process where we try things using tools that many of you are familiar with. Using Jupyter Notebooks and Python, and just even off-the-shelf tools, just trying to see what happens if we crunch the data on this column and mash it up with this other column, etc. And then stories start coming out of there. Then that's it. That lasts like about 2 days. Then after that, you take the next 2 or 3 days to actually then craft this in a public interface. In this case, D3 and JavaScript from scratch. Using packages, D3 is a package. You use existing packages to move quickly and tell the stories that you need to tell. In the end, after this 7 days, we had, for this one, we had 6 visualizations. So let me repeat that again. We did this in 7 days with a team of 7 people. Starting from scratch. The first one, which we call click, I already explained to you. The second one, the trap, is a calculation, mathematical calculation of the distance between each of the entry points where the refugees were being turned. By the way, these are people seeking refugee status. So that was super legal in the United States, except at this particular point, they're being said they cannot come in. They're being pushed away from the entry point. So what they do, people have been traveling for miles, they walk, 100 meters that way or 100 meters this way to try to get in. When we did the math to calculate whether there was any entry point that was safe for any of these people, pretty much no. There was no safe entry point into the United States for this family. At a very rudimentary level, the story we tell here is that the border was a trap at this particular moment in time. In the eye, we use just data from Google API to actually give people a visceral, physical sense of what these locations are, where they are. This is actually what the public really appreciated this one. A lot of people writing to us. I never realized that there was an immigration center next to the beauty salon where I go get my hair done and this kind of thing. And this is part of us trying to start accumulating visualizations in order to tell a larger story about how ICE is everywhere. And it is already part of the American fabric. This was the main story we were telling with this series of visualizations, which was a new story, or a story that a lot of people had failed to internalize or understand, the extent to which ICE, the shadow police, had actually integrated into the fabric of American society. In charts, we do, that's the more wonky social scientific, approaches where we actually look at the numbers more mathematical ways, not necessarily to tell a story right away to the public, but this is where people who want to verify the numbers and come in and analyze the numbers, then can come in and look at the different places where these people are. ADP is an important one. It's that average daily population in the United States. So in this country, at least as of 2018, there were on every day an average of almost 45,000 people incarcerated, immigrants incarcerated through this network of facilities in ICE. Now, finally, this is a visualization of where the children were according to our individually researched data. And when I say individually researched data, the data set we were working for, the orange dots, came from a FOIA document. FOIA is a mechanism we have in the United States for requesting documents from the government that they are required to share them, a certain class, unless they're classified. So we get the detention information from a data set that was already compiled in a PDF by somebody who had FOIA'd the government recently. We took the numbers out and put them in a spreadsheet so we can do the visualization. But where the children were, the juvenile detention facilities that are run by the Office of Refugee and Resettlement, that one was hand research going into Facebook, Google Maps, Reddit, a bunch of places. Just very nimble, agile, no limit to where we're going to go find the information to see if we can locate where these places are. And eventually we had like about 113 of these sites, and this is where we present them. The thing is though, at that particular point, this is where the connection to data for good and ethics comes in. Our team had decided that it wasn't a good idea for us to share the data with the public directly. And the reason was because we felt that we saw that a bunch of the activists from the left were actually going to these places where the children were already under a lot of trauma, state violence, and some of the protests were exacerbating the situation for the children. In fact, we had reports from some of the children saying that they felt scared coming into the airport here in JFK when they saw the protesters. So this is something we wanted to, at that particular moment in time, we wanted to prevent further protests in these places, attracting more state violence to this place, and who knows what could have happened. So we decided not to share the data directly. If you were a data scientist or somebody familiar with data approaches, it wouldn't have been hard for you to get the data. In fact, that's what ProPublica did. They took our data and they presented it to the public. But in any case, I'll skip the bad one. This series of visualizations was presented with a research report where we talk about the limits of our research and some of our own critique of our own visualizations. Where I invite you to read it. For example, like what would happen if we make the circles bigger? It it tells you the wrong story. So it's a lot of our own self-meditation on how we're telling the story, and also a lot of the research that we never get a chance to include in the visualizations. So, for example, one of the things that happened while we were doing research is that we found out that people were using Google Maps to ask for information about their kids. This led to us looking then at Facebook, and then we noticed that people were doing the same on Facebook. And these are, as you know, kind of like yellow pages automatically generated by Google and by Facebook. People don't actually register these places. Google just actually registers everything that has an address and is officially registered with the government as a business address. It's already automatically added to Facebook and to Google Maps. So people who are hijacking these spaces in order to try to find information about their family members. Now, this of course led to I was tweeting. While we were doing this during the period of 7 days, I was tweeting constantly about the work that was ongoing in process, because we always needed that voice from the outside to work with us as we were doing this. And then that was picked up by Slate magazine, and they ran a whole story just on that, on that phenomenon that same week. That helped us put us in touch with Wired, which is what helped eventually spread the project to the American public. But we can talk about that later. One of the other things that is important to mention here is also that part of our research took us into the business paraphernalia of these companies that contract with ICE. So here you see, for example, in the annual business report of one of these companies, I think this is Southwest Key, one of the most famous ones, where they actually they're very proud that 95% of the people they serve are people of color. But it's one of the most ironic things about American bureaucracy right now. What they mean here is that 95% of the people that they serve are 95% of people they incarcerate. So the whole diversity and inclusion is revealed for what it is, a sham in this country, this kind of management speak. This, of course, connects back to ideas that you're familiar with, I hope, from Hannah Arendt, who studied the Eichmann trials and came up with the concept of the banality of evil. Like, we are constantly aware that whenever there's anything evil in society, it usually has, like managers and, office supplies and things like that. In any case, they took down the report once we started tweeting. That tweet itself of like us calling them out on it became viral, and they actually removed the report on the day after. All of this is happening while we're doing the project. While we're doing the project, we're also inviting a bunch of scholars who are experts on the border to look at alpha versions of our visualizations and compare them to the research they've been doing for decades, and write reflections on what they see. What do our visualizations teach them that they hadn't seen in their research, or what does it do? And it was a great exercise in almost 100% positive response from the experts that what they were seeing was very useful, and that what they were seeing was not something, they had not been able to kind of put the macroscopic vision together of how these things kind of came together. For us, it was important also not to only show visualizations, and this is the reasons why we wanted to do these kind of essays accompanying the presentation, because we believe in our team that visualizations by themselves don't speak. The visualizations actually can be very dangerous if they're not accompanied by prose, by very careful, well thought out explanations and narratives about what it is that they're doing. So I know some of you are super excited about visualizations, and you're like, I want you to, if it was up to me, I would like contain that enthusiasm a little bit, because, for example, we saw, in the main one, the iconic one with we saw a lot of Trump supporters saying, yes, I'm super happy that ICE is doing its job. Now, so the visualizations speak in different ways to different people, and this is why for us it was important to frame our visualizations were our own narrative. We also created a map of allies. What we'll do is part of our team, 2 people on our team just went to town and doing individual vetting of allies that involved a triple verification, calling people to make sure, doing a lot of research on the internet to make sure that people we were putting in the allies directory were actual allies, were actual people who were helping, who had a history of helping immigrants. So as the American public was learning about these kind of things happening in their hometowns, they could also find who in geographical proximity were allied organizations, lawyers, social workers, etc., who could help. Again, all of this was being done in 7 days. And it was done by this team. This is the original team of Volume 1. I'll just quickly close over Volume 2 in a second. In fact, I'm making a point. Two of these people were at Columbia at the time, but one of them was at NYU, but now joined us as the new data manager for the university, Moacir de Separados, another one of the hidden secrets. I wish he was here with me. Moacir is an amazing mapper. He coded like 95% of the JavaScript in D3 here, with me at 5%. Linda Rodriguez is the one that I wanted to give a special shout out to you, because she's no longer with us. In fact, she had terminal cancer when she joined the team, and this was the last scholarly project she worked on. And she wanted me to hide her from the team. I knew that she had that she was on her deathbed when she was working on this project. But she didn't want me to tell the team. She was in Houston at the time. And then, of course, after the project was done, I was allowed to tell the team that this happened, and she passed away like a month and a half after the project was launched. This is special. It carries a lot of weight for me, because this goes to show you that some of these projects actually can be so meaningful to us as human beings that we decide to work on them at the last moment. Then we're not working anymore on some of the other stuff we were doing for our employer. All right, so really quickly, volume, after volume 1, then we went to Mexico and organized a hackathon there with a bunch of experts in digital humanities in Mexico, and the ideas for volume 2 started being born. And volume 2 has a lot more participants and contributors than volume 1, and it took longer. So volume 2 took like about a month and a half. And if I can go here, quick, and not allowing me. In volume 2, what we did is we mapped the money. So in volume 1, we mapped the incarceration regime, communicate the idea that ICE is everywhere and that immigrants live a life of fear in this country. And in volume 2, we wanted to know who was profiting from all of this. So what we did is we used the data. The main data set for volume 2 was the USA spending.gov data, which is a mess. I don't know if any of you have worked with the US spending.gov data. It has like about 2,000 columns and an obscene amount of rows. So we found out all the companies that were benefiting from doing private contracts with us. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the way things work in this country, so the way that it works is that, you know, these kind of facilities contract with the government. So the government's budget is used to pay private companies for these things. These are not government companies for the most part. So the transportation of the immigrants from one place to another, the incarceration of the immigrants, the office supplies from the banality of evil of ICE. All of these things are private companies that contract with the government. So in this one, we wanted to, in the main visualization, what we do is we map it by county, because those contracts usually go to the company's home address, which is in a particular county of the United States. And congressmen in the United States, actually, a lot of their job is to try to bring as much money as possible to their county. So you will see a lot of debates in this country about like the pork and bringing in and compromises in legislation. This is usually because people expect you in your county to go and get that money for the park, for the bridge or whatever, but also for the corporations that live inside your county. So this is why we mapped out the political party and who was the congressman for the places that were receiving the contract money. One of the things we learned from this visualization is that Democrats and Republican districts are just as equally to blame in sort of creating this for-profit industry. Now, the ones that have the most intense color are the ones that are receiving the highest contracts. And, green is Democrat, blue is Republican. the ones that the intensity indicates the size of the contract that they're seeing. The best way to, there's different ways to explore this data. Here is the growth from the Obama era in the size of the contract to the Trump era. I'll move, here, if you click on any one of these companies, it tells you what the name of the company and what the size of the contract is. In game, we actually do like a wall of shame, where we this is where you will find the 2 universities that are participating in this. You will find also big companies that you're familiar with, including Amazon. Yeah, if you can move that. But also, one of the visualizations we did is also actually, we wanted to show how actually minorities also participate in this. This is not only, white men doing this. Yes, white men are the owners of most of these corporations that are profiting. But white women and Asian Americans, South Asian Americans, Latinos, and Black people are also the owners of some of the companies benefiting from this. So this is what we call equal opportunity oppression. The government has to have equal opportunity contracts. So a lot of people apply for these contracts based on their minority status as owners of corporations. We felt that it was important for us not to let anybody escape scrutiny. In here, this is you guys seen Law and Order, where like the crazy guy with like plotting all the conspiracy theories and stuff like that, the murder board, where it's like trying to connect the dots. And we were trying to do this to explain to you, to the public also, how all of these contracts are connected to each other. How one contract and subcontract depends on another, and how companies are linked. I don't think it works, but we tried. It is just a mess. It is a mess of connections. But what does work, I think, in trying to understand what these types of companies are, is this visualization, is the trade. Now in here, what we did is we actually had like 2,500 contracts that we were looking at that were only for eyes. One of the things that we were not happy with was the ways that these countries were categorized. They were categorized according to the classification system of the NAFTA agreement, the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement that was signed during the Clinton era, that is still in use today for how you name a company. So you could be construction, or you can be office supplies and this kind of things. So we wanted to actually use our perspective as scholars in the humanities to actually rename these companies as we would understand them. So this allows us to then rename companies by whether they do surveillance or not, or companies where their main business is actually to try to reform and educate and get disciplined people or not. These are things that mean something to us, not necessarily to the business people at the free trade agreement. And finally, in lines, you get a time series of the people deported in this country by airport from 2012 until the present. This is a different data set than the money. This is JFK, where JFK is like around here. This is New York, 972 people in 2015. In any case, that was volume 2. And in volume 2, we also did the same thing with invited essays by experts who work on the border, who work on money, who work on corporations, etc., to provide the reflections on this. And again, we also did our own research introspection about like where we think we failed and where we may have succeeded. In fact, one of the things that didn't make it into the visualizations was one of our biggest failures. We actually had good ideas about how to calculate where they were going to grow. And internal to the team, we predicted a lot of the things that you're seeing right now. But the data had too many holes, so we couldn't come out in public with our calculations. There was still an element of speculation on our end that we didn't, that stopped us from actually using creative visualizations to predict what it has gotten worse, basically. And like just 2 days ago, we found that the government is doing, there's some secret documents got leaked where the government is preparing training for urban, training ICE officers for urban warfare. and this kind of thing. All of these things we had more or less already seen, because in our minds, after looking at all the data, what we could predict is that the government is just getting ready to stop people from coming in and deports the ones that are in larger amounts than they have. Now, the other one, we also figure out a way how to actually, what we call the news barometer, and there it was the lack of money that actually stopped us. We figure out a way how to scrape data from local newspaper sources all across counties in the United States to figure out what were the keywords, using a little bit combination of text analysis, sentiment analysis with like just getting data to a firehose. And actually figuring out, like, you would have a search box and you would say like the name of one company, and you could find out whether anybody in that district or in that vicinity was talking about that company in the press or not. That's because we understand the press in the United States to also be divided by money and politics. So a lot of these companies that actually run local presses in a lot of these districts are totally controlled by one party or the other. In any case, we failed there. I'll stop there with the project. So this, talk about labor. So the first one was done in seven days by a team of 7 people, 2 at Columbia, 1 in NYU, 1 in Boston, 1 in Europe, 3 or 4 in Texas, with some helpers on social media, contributors on social media. The second version had a very similar setup. It wasn't the original core team, a lot of the people on the core team, but there was a different setup. It was distributed all over the place. None of us get paid to do this. I'm a librarian. My job is to support Columbia's faculty and students whenever they want to use advanced methods in computation, and they don't know what to do. So Tiana is too busy to help everybody. So that's like my job. My job is, so you want to use topic modeling to study 19th century novels? Yeah, I'll help you. 3 people here are full-time faculty in Humanities department. Their job is to write books. Like literally that is their job, to teach and write books. They don't have time for this. And students, of course, your job depends on where you are. Your job is to finish your dissertation or your master's thesis. So we had to borrow steel time in order to do this. And here's the labor challenge, connecting back to the idea of divisional labor that I was talking about. We are incentivized to work inside the university on these kinds of projects, and we have many, where we get a grant. If we get a grant, it is perfectly fine to work on these types of projects. And we take first half a year to write the grant, we get the grant, and then take 1 year or 2 years to do the project. We can even collaborate with others outside of the university if we get a grant. We get this joint institution grant, and we are allowed to work on these things in a way that does benefit us a little bit, because we put it in the CV. We say, prestige of getting a grant and this kind of thing. What we are not incentivized is to collaborate with experts in other universities in the absence of a grant, or even within our own university in the absence of a grant. Right? On my side of the fence, in the humanities. Now, part of our problem is that, of course, faculty are not incentivized to work on data projects at all. They have like 0 incentive to work on data projects. Like I just said, I don't get incentivized to work unless I'm helping somebody or teaching somebody. But this kind of project is not the kind of project where you're teaching. At this point, we don't have time to teach. This is a type of project where you want experts, veterans. And I'm sorry if this sounds elitist, but I don't know how else to say it. You need people who know what they're doing in order to do this type of project. And you don't have time to teach because there's certain urgency that doesn't allow you to, let me walk you through like the basics of coding, and here's a loop, and like you can't do it. So it is the formation of this team actually that puts pressure on our ideas of what we're incentivizing or not. Obviously, things are possible if you get together with a team like me and Tian and a few others that actually been doing this for a long time, get together, and we, for 7 days, just work on one thing. We can do amazing things, but we never, ever get incentivized to work together like this. Our schedules are full of doing a million other things. None of those things are getting together to do this kind of thing. this is the main question I wanted to discuss with you. Now, I promised a few other examples because it's not a one-off. So I actually created a little website, a very simple thing that just actually shows you several types of these arrangements. I call them nimble tents because it's like, you know, you set up a tent, and then people come together and stay under the tent. And this nimble is because you actually set up one here and then dismantle it and then go set up somewhere else. This is not the department. This is not the institute. This is a sort of fake institute, fake department that comes together for a small period of time and then disappears. The method for the one that the torn apart is described here. This actually walks you through every step of what we did and what the experts did. The other one that was done at Columbia, these other two were not. I can talk to them about briefly, but the other one that was done at Columbia was an interesting one. That was done the year before torn apart, and that was actually where we fixed the map of Puerto Rico. So after Maria destroyed the island of Puerto Rico, the Red Cross put out a call on OSM HUD task, the OpenStreetMap task manager, where communities, anonymous communities, actually have been helping since the Nepal earthquake to rebuild maps of affected areas. What was different of the one that we did here at Columbia, if you actually, and you can read more if you Google PR Mapathon Columbia NYC, you can read more about what transpired here in this article from the New York Times. What was different about this one that is not mentioned in the article is that actually we not only organized a Mapathon here and invited students and faculty to come to help rebuild the map. We actually then went and talked to all of our friends in different labs across the United States that had similar labs to ours, and we were like, can you run the same workshop? And little by little, 25 universities in the United States actually set up the same thing we did here at Columbia. We were the first. We shared a model with them. We said, this is how you organize it really quick. We organized this in 6 days. So 200 people doing maps in there. We trained in half an hour, and they worked for 2 hours to add data to the map. After we did it here, then these 25 other people did the same thing with our model. They said, here's how to do a poster. Here's a template, Google Drive with a poster. Here's how to talk to your administrator. Here's how to get money for pizza. Here's how you teach it. Here's how you do it. And lo and behold, we rebuilt a map for the whole country in a matter of 1 month in collaboration with the other universities. So that's what was different about this Mapathon that had not been done before. Instead of actually, because the idea of crowdsourcing has been around forever, but the idea has been open citizen, open science, and everybody, just anonymous person, you come and do it. In this one, we were like, let's actually organize little mini tents in environments in which we know already that these are possible, doable really fast, that already have communities. Instead of letting you work on your couch, the idea is let's go to the library, and we already kind of do this. We teach data, we teach mapping, we teach all these things. Let's actually just use that, concentrate it, and then we can actually have an even higher impact. If you look at the data for like hot OpenStreetMaps, of the difference between like when you do it with like anonymous crowds or when you do it when it's us, the spike was humongous. And that the Red Cross eventually did acknowledge this in the report that they filed about the thing as thanking whatever the community, our community was for this. This is another example in which we come together, more or less doing what we're really good at outside of incentive structures in order to use data for good. So to conclude, so that we can have a conversation, the idea here is that I take the call for data for good very seriously. When we say, let's do data for good, I'm like, yes, let's do data for good. That's not going to be most of my work. I have art and history to worry about 90% of the time. But if I'm going to work for data for good, let us make structures in the university that actually do incentivize. having a conversation here is great, but then we go on, and there's actually no hook into our careers, our professions, what we're here to do, and doing the work. So I've had wonderful conversations with colleagues in the past year about at different universities about how we may come up with structures that actually help us do this, where there is a real incentive, a real hook for actually getting us to come together as experts, or in some cases like this one where we're teaching super basic stuff for people that we know is going to actually have a real impact in the world. And I'm now opening the floor to you so that you can tell me your ideas about what do you think would be cool ways so that we can get Columbia University to incentivize this work and allow us to get together and do this kind of thing. And thank you for inviting. Yeah.
So actually, let me turn on the volume from the online participant a little bit.
Question here.
Yes, I'm just trying to. Yeah.
Thank you. Very interesting. And I have two questions. One is I didn't understand what volume 1 and volume 2 is. That's one question. What's a volume? This other, I think, bigger question is, you said it's important that there be not just a data visualization, but probes to frame it and structure it, and that there were stories you wanted to tell. You told us one story, which is ice is everywhere, which seems, I mean, I didn't know that, so I learned something here. But how do you know what the story is? And then when you tell it, how is that story communicated to audiences?
So the first part of your question, volume 1 was about the detention centers, and the main message there was ICE is everywhere. And then volume 2 was about the money, and the main message there is a growth, and all of these industries and both parties are involved.
And if I wanted to find volume 1, it's on a website, or it's...
All of this is on a website. This is not a PowerPoint. This is, if you Google torn apart Separados Columbia University, you will...
It's there, volume 1.
And you will find volume 1 and volume 2. So you select volume, you will land on volume 2, because that was the last one, so it will be like the welcoming you, but you can switch to volume 1 by going to volume. You can, the site is also translated into French and Spanish. It's amazing what people, when you put together a team of 7 people who know what they're doing, what you can do.
Show the GitHub site, maybe that would help us.
The data is all on GitHub. If you go to credits, if you go to bibliography, you will have a link to the repository on GitHub.
Yeah, no, I have it here.
You have it.
So I think you can show people how to Google torn apart Columbia, Alex Gill, that will be able to get.
Torn apart Columbia, Wired. You might land on this, which is what actually made it public. We don't have access to the American public as definitely professors, and some professors here at this university do directly. That's because they're super friends with the. But even that's because they have 1 million followers on Twitter or something like that. But that's very few professors. Most of us depend on the press. This one made it to the public because of Wired magazine. So again, we always depend on the press. So like PR Mapathon, it helps. The New York Times is like, can you please, get the word out that we're doing this. That will help us with, convince our friends to do the same and this kind of thing. So it's a collaboration with journalism always. And of course, at Columbia University, we do get to befriend a lot of journalists. And in this particular case, Torn Apart, actually, there was a couple of Columbia Journalism Review. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
The Wired is being populated by ads. Yeah. So it was very nice of Emily to call it library science, but the thing is that nobody, like, this kind of object is super interesting. This kind of object is, what is it? A generic, we had our data journalist friends, so we were talking to Washington, we were sharing data with Washington Post as we were doing this, because Washington Post had already, after 5 days after this broke out, Washington Post did one, but their data was incomplete. So we got on the phone with them and we were like, we got more data than you, and we can share it. And then talking to our colleagues there, it's like, you guys are data journalists? They were like, no, we're not. I'm a librarian, and I'm talking to a historian and a bunch of literary folks, and we can code, so maybe we can do some of these things. But a lot of people still believe this is data journalism. I think the difference here between like pure data journalism and what we did is that we add a lot more scholarly apparatus to what we did, and also a distinction important to us is that this does not actually divert that much from the work of a historian. So what we're doing is what historians call documenting the now. So it's like basically creating a scholarly object that can then serve as witness to our moment in history. I know. This kind of generic.
I'll give you my answer to your question. I'm not sure what your feedback is, but I talked a lot about the data life cycle, starting with collecting data, generating data, and then collecting so on. And before I got to Columbia University, I would sort of end with data visualization. And then I talked to all those people in the journalism school, and it doesn't end with that. It ends with storytelling. To interpret this, even the pretty pie charts, bar graphs, and whatnot, that's not enough. You actually have to tell the story of what is the end user supposed to get out of those visualizations. And the more complicated the visualization, of course, the more it is important to tell the end user what you're supposed to see. So I, learned a lot in talking to my colleagues in the journalism school, which is, in the end, if you're trying, it is about storytelling. And so I think you hit a very good point. There are messages to be gotten out of, I guess, presumably Volume 1 and Volume 2.
Yeah, and the way we arrived to, because I think that was part of your question, how did we arrive at what message we wanted to, that's part of, for us, of the data exploration.
Exactly, yeah.
You don't know yet, so it's that middle stage. The first stage is research and aggregating data. So we don't know what the data sets are out there, and this kind of thing, right? These are not we've been working on this for 2 years, so we know all the data sets available. No, this is we want to do something, but we're not really sure what is there to be done. In fact, the answer might be, after we look at the data, there is nothing to be done here. I don't think it would be appropriate for us to actually do a project here. So after 3 or 4 days of doing research, this actually happened 2 weeks before. Another social media phenomenon was happening where there were 2,500 kids that the government were missing. So I don't know if you remember that, put yourself back a year ago. And what we started, me and one of the core team members here, the one at Boston, Rupika Rissom, and me started doing some exploratory data research. So it's can we see, what do you mean the lost kids? Can we see if we, doing some, advanced Googling, find where some of these, basically that's what it is, that can we find where some of these kids are? And then what we started finding, though, was that actually some of these kids didn't want to be found. In fact, a big chunk of these kids didn't want to be found. The reason they're gone from, would you want Trump to find your kids? No. So that's why we decided we're not doing this. So that could be the result of the data exploration. So again, first step for students to pay attention, because this is always the same. Do research and gather the data. Research is not only about where the data sets are, it's also about the issue. Whatever the issue is, try to learn as much as possible about that issue. Reading prose, yes, reading. You read a lot. And then once you have read a lot, have a good data set, and decide that you might want to do something, you start exploring some visualizations to see what stories come out. And then in that period of 2 years, 2 days where you, in the back end, we were using Telegram for team communication. We're just sharing little graphs with each other, little pie charts, and it's what do you think about this? And what do you think about this? What do you think? What would be the really main point here? What would be? And that's when you come up with it. Hey, you know what? American public probably doesn't know that ISIS is everywhere. That's probably a good one. And the fact that, and in terms of how some visualizations communicate stories easier than others, The one about ISIS everywhere, that one's not hard, because that one is a lot of points on a map. Thank God, that is at least the visual literacies of the public actually understand a lot, the concept of a lot. And so we don't have to explain that one that much. In fact, that was the one where we had to under-explain. We added prose to get the public to not try to read too much into the dots. That was not there. Because the public, I mean, we're just an educated guess that the public is just going to read this in the kind of like complete infection model of things, which the right wing has been used. Instead of the infection here, instead of the immigrants, is the actual detention centers, right? It's a technique that a lot of dots on a map has been used since the Nazis until today. And they used to use it in pamphlets. So we have to be careful for them not to read that much. Other visualizations, like the one with the murder board, that one actually, we like it as experts. We know what it's saying, but it's also, I don't trust the public to actually be able to read that much into it. As much as we try to help people understand the connections between different types of contracts, I can try. So we have 4 large categories. You saw the categories, surveillance and this kind of thing. Well, one company will be involved in some of the things it does in surveillance and some of the things it does in facilities. So one company can provide different services of different types. So this is, how do you explain to the public the different categories that the companies of activity that the companies participate in? It's good for experts because it shows you more or less how these companies try to corner markets all related to detention by portraying themselves as different types of tax-exempt activities. Yeah, I mean, it's good for like super brainy walks. But for the public, I think, I mean, there are disagreements in the team. I think it's not that helpful.
I have a question. So you mentioned that I really like the word about what's called emergency research on, the RRR, the
rapid research.
Rapid research. I know. I like how you say that when that happens, you do not have time to teach. You want to have a team who are really good and then just get things done very quickly. However, I think I'm speaking for all the students on campus, and some of them want to eventually be doing some of this RRR. Even a lot of research scientists sometimes would like to volunteer their time to do something of this. I think, university is really the good place for this to take place because there's not a conflict of interest. However, if they're not ready to be a member of your rapid research team, they want to be, what are the things they can do to be good enough to be one of the team eventually? Is there a way of them start participating in some of that activity and doing some of the not so rapid research and then to get faster?
Yes. So thank you for that question, because it's a great segue to invite you guys. If you want to, the name of we get together in the studio in the library. The library has this co-working space. The library is kind of like data science a little bit because it's like neutral territory. It's like Switzerland, and we're supposed to connect to like all the universities. We have a co-working space that has events, talks, and things like this. Studio.cul.columbia.edu is the website with information about the different spaces. So we have one in Butler Library and one in Lehman. So Lehman is more a social science, data number heavy, and the one in Butler is more or less it just worked out that way. It's like we're more the humanities sort of storytelling side of the house. People congregate around. The group on every Friday, the studio in Butler Library, the main library. When you go to Low Library, it's the big building. Some of you who may not have been, it's a big library building on the south of campus. On every Friday for the past 7 years, we have had open lab hours from 3 to 5. So today, after I leave here, I'm going to go, and it's going to be the soft launch of this year's open lab. The official launch of the semester is next week, because today there's a lot of faculty retreats. The new thing, the faculty retreats were not, that's the new thing this year. And the main group that where most of these advanced projects, like how do you get to be, it's called the Group for Experimental Methods in the Humanities. This group meets every Friday there at the Open Lab. So Open Lab is open because you can come and work on anything. This group will be working there on very specific things. In this semester, we're going to have 3 projects that are training grants. This is a new thing for us this semester. We always said, we never decided what the projects were going to be before. We always said, whatever comes. The group is very productive. We have like 37 projects in data science, mapping, and anything you can, there's software engineering, there's all kinds of things in there. I invite you to explore. The website for the portfolio for the group is called xdmethod.plaintext.in. Now it is with this group, like most of these projects that we have done have involved this group. So with these training projects, you can participate right away. We're going to have 3 this semester. One is going to be doing a data visualization of kin networks in a plantation society in Jamaica in the 18th century. Now, this is the most famous plantation tour in Jamaica, and they always tell the story of this white lady who was the owner of the slaves, and she died like a lonely, sad life. So what we want to do is retell that story, but instead of centering that white lady, that's a myth, by the way, it's not even true, the story about the white lady that died lonely. We want to tell the story from a historian perspective, centering the lives of the slaves. And we're going to do this using D3. So for those of you who want to train in D3, this is a good opportunity. We're going to do another one. Those of you who want to train in software engineering on what we call minimal computing. So a lot of the way we design software and do it is by eliminating excess. It's too complex. That's a whole talk by itself. If you want to learn about minimal computing or elegant computing, there will be a project where we will work with some Islamic manuscripts of the Mughal period that are held in the northeast of the United States, creating an exhibit for them. This will help you with those of you interested in storytelling, because the data is already there. All we got to do is now we're going to tell stories with these manuscripts. And there's going to be a text reuse. Those of you interested in text analysis in Python, there will be a text reuse exercise in looking at property relations in data from the 18th century and 19th century, like in text, it's like who owns what, who gets to talk about, who gets to determine the fate of this or that based on text analysis and at a very large scale. So they're kind of beginner projects because you will like learn, if you haven't worked on these kind of things, you get to practice. Now you guys I'm in data science synthesis, since you are way more technologically savvy than the students we work on things. For you, it's an opportunity to actually learn on the storytelling side of the house, on the research side of the house, on how these kind of teams kind of come up with the story. How do you come up with the story? It's a great question, right? Well, you get to see how we come up with the story and how we do our research. So it's a great incentive for you to, all of you are welcome, and we will find a space for you. If you come, for our colleagues, that's what I was saying, if we don't have incentives, of course, always we know each other and we're talking on Slack and on Data for Good all the time, but there's no incentive for us to like, hey, why don't we do this, or why don't we do that? I think we still have a lot of work to do in finding ways that we can actually, where we're not teaching, we're not practicing, we're actually doing something with immediate effect. And we do, kind of. It's just not, I don't know, what has been your experience? You guys have been running this for 2 or 3 years now, and I know you guys have been wanting to do this kind of work with colleagues everywhere. Have you been able to collaborate on this kind of like, it's just going to be us and this team, without a grant? It's us and this team for like 2 weeks only. Right? We're just going to do this. Have you been done anything like this?
We haven't done rapid one. We have done super slow.
Oh, that's slow. That's super.
I really like this rapid idea because you can respond to current events.
Right. That's why we did the rapid model. you can obviously you can't do everything, but there are some things that you can do where you know that you more or less can do like fairly quick, especially if you have the data. If you have the data, then it doesn't take us long to actually come up with ways to tell stories with that data quick, and then we can go back to doing our job. Part of the reason we do it, I'm not kidding about this is very real. Part of the reason we do it so these things fast. In fact, the lab actually, if you look at the lab, at the about page of the lab, our motto is rapid prototyping of speculative ideas. Like we have been practicing how to do fast things, but the reason is because we don't have time to do we have done some slow, big projects like the Open Syllabus project was started at the lab, and now Joe Caraganis took it over at the American Syllabus, where we collected 6 million syllabi and did text analysis of all that is being taught in English. That project has taken like 5 years, it's still going on. Beautiful project. But that's not what what we want to do all the time. We want to do the fast things so we can do more impactful things.
So what happened to those prototypes? If you are
we collect them there, but that's the other thing. And we also are very savvy. I'm a librarian, so I have to think about like longevity. So we always try to build with an eye towards, we try to eliminate database. Everything we do, we try the output to be static. So we don't use Jupyter notebooks that much, mostly because we depend on Jupyter notebooks running a particular way on a server. So what we do is we try to, everything that we do ends up being just HTML, flat HTML files that we can put in simple storage. So in fact, most of our projects live either in S3, in an S3 bucket or something like that.
So people take the prototype you create and then make them into to the full scale, so that's spectacular.
Yes, yeah. So Open Syllabus we're not part of Open Syllabus anymore. Open Syllabus, like I said, it belongs to. It's a good example to talk about. Open Syllabus.
The number 2.
Oh. I don't know how to type standing up. This is a good example of a project where like some of the early ideas were prototyped in the lab, and then that team took it and they have been working on it like half time, like 20 hours a week. And this one, what we did in the beginning, it was just like a few thousand syllabi, the syllabus before the courses. By now it's 6 million syllabi in English language around the world. And there's a process of scraping, then machine learning to actually get rid of the trash and keep the good stuff. And then it all goes into I think it's Postgres by now, I don't know what, they have a huge super industrial strength database after citation extraction of all the things in the syllabi. And other kind of entity extractions, like the name of the university and the name of the department and stuff like that, gives you like an overview of syllabi around the world. These are the top 10 texts taught in the English language. The number 1 text taught in the English language is the Elements of Style, which is like the grammar one, the grammar book that students in the first year they take. Of course, the right wing actually they like the Communist Manifesto is number 6. They're like, we knew that you were communists. The people, the professors are all communists. We knew it. Of course, they don't know how to use the internet, because if you click on it, if you click on any one of these, it tells you what other texts are taught with it. It tells you where it's being taught around the world. And one of my favorite things. This was somebody, David McClure, who we went to school together at the University of Virginia, using Notevec, is the map of all disciplines, of all texts within disciplines. So you see that Marx, the Communist Manifesto, kind of falls, the dot is clustered with sociology, with texts that are taught in sociology. Here's the humanities here. I'm in the blue here. This is my world. Digital culture is next to finance. We were debating that on Twitter for years. We were like, why? It's just a coincidence of the clustering. Because really, like, there's a point here in which the texts don't make any sense to be together.
Marketing.
I don't know. It's so weird that actually felt like media studies and digital culture actually felt next to business. But
consider X and Y for these, for how those are plotted?
And it's all not too vague. The thing is, probably the reason why they felt so close is because literature is so far that actually is like as the algorithm starts organizing these things, the vectors by cosine similarity between it just puts.
Can you scroll to the right so I can see math and computer science?
Hey, computer science is like an island here.
So marginalized.
Yeah.
Well, statistics is so small. So this is based on the assigned reading.
Yeah, the syllabus. It's the assigned reading of like every course that is open on the internet. That was, a lot of the syllabus are not open, but anything that this team has been able to find on the internet, process of a lot of manual, a lot of scraping over a period of 5 years, and now it has a button where a whole university can submit their data. That's going to help a lot. It's been impossible to convince Manisha and the rest of the team here so we can get our syllabi up in here. But
I would think that for this project, that the mapping is more accurate for the discipline where reading is the main instructional method.
Right,
And
but if
for
you know.
other discipline that when reading is not as heavily used, and that may not be very accurate.
Right, it's funny, because one of the things you learn, but it is one of the most taught texts is calculus, which is a textbook. So textbooks still sell a lot, because if you think about it, 25 in one like math, they're going to use the calculus book. All the students are going to read that book, but in every English class, they're going to read different things because it depends on the different professors. So you learn from studying the data that this is the case. It's not that they're reading less; they're reading more homogeneously. So math reads more homogeneously than English does. That's why English looks so broad, is because it has a lot more things, but the dots are smaller because they actually don't appear as much as the textbooks appear in computer science or math or physics or biology. But anyway, this is not our project anymore. This was to answer the question. Yes, prototypes are then taken by us, and then there's several other examples where prototypes that were built in the lab were then taken and became software or became these kind of projects.
So I'm just going to give you another sales pitch to the students who are either here or online, that even you're here for 3 semesters or 4 years, depending on which program you're in, you can create a prototype that can be taken by others to create something much bigger.
Absolutely. In our lab, we are not the only lab that does prototyping on campus. In our lab, we just have a focus on humanities work, on social justice, on societal impact, and history. So this would be like I said, and I will repeat again, and I see you looking at the clock, if you really want to know how to tell stories, there's no better crew to hang out than people who have been reading stories all their lives. And that's mostly people in the humanities. We write them and read them. And then we code a little bit, too. Yeah.